You will never be the same.
And with a full catastrophe, he didn't mean it was all bad.
God that I worship has a way of saying, don't play with
I invite you to the dance with the Lord of the dance.
God didn't call America to do what she's doing in the world now.
Please dance.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Remote Pastoral Care. As usual, I'm Pastor Don, and as you may have noticed, some things are a little bit different for today's episode. For starters, I've got my hair down and my glasses on, which may tell you that I am recording at night. We normally record these in the morning, but today we're recording at night because I am joined by two completely different guests from our usual, and that's because we are joined by guests who are actually in Japan. This is the first episode we've done that has nobody in the United States on the call. So this is going to be definitely a sort of a fun and different experience. So I'm going to give my my dear friends here a chance to introduce themselves. Travis, you want to go first?
Absolutely. Good evening or good morning, wherever you are. My name is Travis. I live now in Tokyo. I've been stuck in Japan one way or another for about 12 years running. And it's really weird for me to say that. Yeah, that's about it.
Oh, don't make yourself sound so boring. Come on.
Well, you know, I want to get into all of the details. We'll be here all night.
Oh, fair enough. Dom, you want to tell us about you?
Okay, so just like Travis, I'm Dom. I've been in Japan for like 5 years now. I've been living in Kobe all throughout, and I've been able, my goal as of the moment is to visit all of those, like they said, like 3 magnificent places here in Japan. I've been to 2 already, and I've been looking forward to visiting Miyakojima. Yep. Nice to meet you guys.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I haven't gotten to do as much traveling around as I would like, although I will say, if everything goes to plan, I'm looking at finally getting to see Okinawa.
That is fun.
Yeah.
I've been to Okinawa exactly once, and I got to tell you, driving around Okinawa with friends is quite the experience. It's just completely different from the rest of Japan.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it on the grounds of I'm one of those poor Americans who has never been to Hawaii. So I will get to visit Japan's Hawaii before I visited America's Hawaii.
You can get A&W root beer at an actual restaurant.
Hey, that's got my attention. I'm a big fan of root beer.
No. It's an actual A&W restaurant.
Yeah, I know, as you say. Although I miss, I don't know, you ever hear of Dog and Suds?
Oh, that was some good stuff.
Oh, that's a real Midwestern root beer for you there.
Yeah, I used to get that in Fitz's from St. Louis back when I was living in the U.S.
Okay. And I can guess that at least half of this call gets what that is. And I'm guessing about half of our listeners tops get what Dog and Suds is too. And that's actually a good point to pivot into what we're talking about is internationality of stuff. Like we're talking about a really localized brand of root beer here that only works in a couple of states in the US. And wouldn't you know it that, you know, just about everything changes from place to place too, including, as we're talking about today, Christianity. So the experience, we tend to think of the faith as being this kind of universal sort of thing, that it's all the same no matter where you go and how you go. But that just isn't the case. I'm sure we'll touch on some of the history and stuff of it a bit too in turn, but what I wanted to start with is, you know, you guys tell me a little bit about your experiences with Christianity and how that's been for you. I know Travis, much like me, you started in general Midwest America and moved out this way. Dom, I know your background is much different than that. So I figure between the 3 of us, we can probably share some interesting stories.
Absolutely. Dom, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so actually, I grew up in on a quote-unquote religious family. So in the Philippines, basically around, I would say 70 to 80% of Filipinos are actually Catholic. So I grew up as a Catholic I was brought up by my grandparents who are devout Catholic. So I grew up kind of close to being like a Christian until I came here to Japan when I was 20. I think that was 5 years ago. And that's when I started getting to know more about Christianity. And that's when I accepted the Lord as, you know, my savior. And that's when I started getting into like the deep dives of the Christianity. Whenever I've had like questions about like weird things in the Bible, I always go to Pastor Don, and he gives me such wonderful explanations with that. Yeah. So that's basically my Christian life is still a baby. I'm still like 5 years in, and yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically my story here.
Well, I always say there's no reason. I've met a lot of baby Christians that are always like, "Oh, I'm just a baby Christian. You shouldn't take everything I have too seriously." I always tell them, "Don't think that way," because the very first time I met a new adult convert to Christianity, she had only been a Christian for maybe 6 months to a year, something like that, not very long. And now, this was years ago. Now she is currently a pastor and my wife.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, never sell yourself short, man. You never know what God's got in store for you.
Amen.
So, what about you, Travis? What's the direction that you've taken?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I grew up in I guess we would call it a Lutheran household. My mom was Lutheran. My father was raised Catholic. He went to Catholic school and then basically decided he had enough of that. So we went to church. Well, my mom and the kids, we went to church basically not quite every Sunday, but most Sundays. My mom was heavily involved in planning funerals and things at the church there. And the metaphor that I always come back to when talking about my religious upbringing is that it wasn't so much like how some people, especially quote unquote baby Christians or Christians who come to things later, they experience their faith more as a sudden transition, right? They get to go through that. And for me, it was more like just being in a state of saturation where it's just around you all the time and it's a natural part of things and you don't necessarily question it or you don't necessarily look at it with that perspective to say, hey, this might be a little unusual. And so then when I went from that upbringing to Hope College, which was RCA, they had a lot of different opinions on things. And I started to say, well, wait a minute, is this really what I believe? Do I want to associate myself with this? And of course, this was around the time that at college, there were a lot of big conflicts around recognition of LGBTQ individuals. I actually have somewhere back in the US a picture of the school newspaper with a crowd of protesters about, why doesn't the college recognize the LGBTQ student union? And you can see my giant afro hair in the background of the shot.
Yeah, you did always do good at sticking out of a crowd that way.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? I mean, I'm 5'7" and brown and curly in a land full of 6 foot tall blonde people in Holland. Come on.
True.
Not much to do about that. But anyway, after that, I came over to Japan and was stationed on the JET program out in the middle of nowhere in Hyogoken for 2 years. And suddenly, that isolation, being out in the wilderness like that, it's like, where did all the water that I used to be swimming in go? Right? Mm-hmm. And I remember having a few very interesting experiences, one of which there was a checkout lady at the supermarket that I used to go to buy my bento every day. And she just at one point, after I'd been going there for like a year or so, she pops up and asks me, hey, are you Christian? I'm like, well, yes, most Americans are Christian. She's like, why didn't you tell me sooner? And she invites me to her church. And so I got to go to a little rural Japanese church a few times. And that was actually really interesting. I didn't have the Japanese to understand more than about 60% of it at the time. But it was a really cool experience to see people who were passionate about God and living a Christian life in this often unchristian country, especially out in a little town with population 15,000. And after, I think it was probably around the same time as that experience, I started getting invited by some friends who lived in Kobe to go to Kobe Union Church. And things just started, snowballing from there, if you will. And I just kind of fell right back into like being Christian again. after spending all that time in the wilderness, just trying to figure out what does it mean if I don't have the water around me.
Yeah. That's a good context to start looking at this stuff too, is, how much of our faith is personal and how much of it is communal that way. The water in which you swim in. What do we get from ourselves? What do we get from our own walk? And what do we get from the people around us?
Right.
I can speak. I'll speak a little bit. I haven't done this on this show very much, but I suppose I can tell a little bit of my story too, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I grew up much like Travis in the Midwest, what we call the Northern Bible Belt. That whole area against Michigan that was just saturated with Protestant Christianity, particularly Reformed Protestant Christianity. Now, my parents, my father was a Dutch Reformed Protestant. My mother was an Irish Roman Catholic. And, in terms of Christian pairings, that's one of the weirder ones. But my mom went full in for the Reformed life when we moved up into Michigan. And we started going to a Reformed church. And I have to admit, I've never been the greatest when it comes to getting along with people who espouse positions that I don't necessarily agree with. I've gotten better over the years, I like to think. But when I see someone getting up and taking a position that involves hurting or humiliating or upsetting other people for no damn good reason, I tend to get very upset. And this carried with me through a lot of my early faith journeys, because we were in, like I said, the Northern Bible Belt, which meant that it was a hotbed of conservative religion. So we had a lot of pulpit messages that were about things like how the gays are going to burn in hell. We had a lot of pulpit messages about how video games are tools of the devils. We had a couple of specific pulpit messages that were entirely about how my sisters dressed, which I took issue with, because humiliating my sisters in a public venue, that just did not seem to mesh with this good book I had been reading. And in time, I made the decision to go to Hope College as well, because I figured in my naivete that, all right, this can't be the way it is everywhere. Maybe if I go to an actual Christian college, it will be different. And I can see the look on your face already, Travis, going like, different? Come on, man.
Like, I remember the, I forget exactly what it was, but there was a group of Catholic students on campus protesting the Hope College services. And I remember some really weird stuff. And I think I only went to the chapel at Hope maybe twice. But it's interesting that that's so prevalent in Western Michigan, because in like Detroit area where I grew up, maybe it's just because it's a more culturally diverse part of the state. Detroit's, heavily multicultural compared to the rural parts in Western Michigan. Yeah. So we never really had any of those, what I would call the chick tract or the Bible thumping sort of sermons where, oh, the gays are going to make everybody, burn in hell or whatever it may be. It's much more the, look, everyone is human. We got to all get along and love one another. And that's that.
Yeah. I grew up swimming in those chick tract style sermons. And it was a shock to me when I went to college and found out that was dialed up to 11 for a lot. I had my second roommate when I was in college turned out to be one of the unicorns of Hope College. He was he never quite defined his religion, but the vaguest way to put it would be a Celtic style pagan. You talk about protests against the LGBT student union or protests between the Catholics and the Protestants. We had protests outside our dorm room.
Oh my.
Yeah, it was an experience. And it was eye-opening for me, because by default, I wound up on the wrong side of that discriminatory, bigoted kind of Christian focus of attention. And I went from a place where I couldn't understand it to a place where I was getting it thrown at me. And I hadn't changed my beliefs. I had been one of the youngest members ever to join as a full adult member, to pass my what you might call a catechism. I professed my faith in Christ when I was still like 10, 11, something like that.
Damn.
I was a youngin' on that. I knew I wanted to be a pastor around about the time I was in 8th grade. I job shadowed my pastor on a hospice visit and was geeked about it. That's how weird I was as a kid. I was like, I go with my pastor on one visit, and then we go back to the office and flip through some texts, and I'm just sitting there like, where do I sign up? And all the while now I'm here at college, and I got these people just yelling at me, and I couldn't figure it out. And I went for years not being able to figure that one out. I went as a missionary to Japan with the RCA, the Reformed Church, and my intent in doing so was like, look, if this is the way that Christianity is here, I want to see what it's like to spread a different kind of Christianity. I want to go to Japan. And I had talked with Japanese missionaries, a couple of Japanese pastors, and they have been always the ones who preach to me, look, none of this, we don't need to pick a fight to show our faith. And I tried to take that forward. And I ministered in Japan for 5 years or so that I was out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think around about
it was 4 or 5 years, I think.
4 or 5, something like that. And then got the call to go back and do seminary and do the full pastor thing, which quite frankly, I never thought I was ever going to be able to do.
No, it's just something I want to touch on real quick, Don, because I remember something you said back when you first came over, because I was quite shocked to find you here, especially as a missionary. And I said, Don, like, missionary? Really? This doesn't really seem like your cup of tea. And I remember very clearly what you said. It's that I'm not out here proselytizing. I'm out here leading by example.
Yeah, that was more or less it. Is I have believed, and I know this sounds weird from someone who really has a solid love of preaching, but I have always believed in action over preaching. I think for every word that comes out of your mouth, there should be another 2 actions coming out of your hands, so to speak. Which, as you can imagine, trying to live up to that keeps me terribly busy because I just don't shut up. But I do believe that's the theory we got to operate. And so
honestly, that response was one of the things that helped bring me sort of back into Christianity. Was that this being a Christian isn't necessarily the talk, it's the walk.
Yeah.
It's the bringing of water.
And, we're dancing around something that is, I think, good and central to our focus on international Christianity. The effect of the American church on Christianity overseas. And we see that in a lot of very uniquely American theology. Things that American Christians do that really nobody else who isn't touched by the American strain of Christianity does. One of the big ones is this all-in on proselytizing and saving souls approach to Christianity. This save everybody or everybody's going to burn sort of mentality. Very unique to American Christianity. And I don't know, that is, when we talk about Christianity overseas, you can almost see the colonial imprints of America in which cultures are more strongly in that vein.
Well, let's take this back then, because we do have Dom on the call, and he grew up in a completely different sort of setting from you and I. I mean, Dom, in the Philippines, what, if any, sort of experiences did you have or did you see with people trying to convert non-Christians? I understand it's, a majority Catholic culture, but was there any sort of pressure on other people to conform or to convert?
Actually, that's interesting because I've been talking to a lot of Christians in the Philippines as of the moment, and there's this kind of, like what Pastor Don mentioned, they're going all in on that, like saving souls and stuff like that. So I've heard actually from this from these people that, like, especially the youth, because I've been talking to a lot of like around my age range in the Philippines, and they have some kind of a mission that, like, after Sundays, after their worship services, what they need to do is, it's actually like more of a goal or a target that they need to reach out and share the word to at least 2 people after their service. So that's kind of a goal, or that's kind of a target that they need to achieve, and then they're gonna talk about it the week afterwards. So yeah, I found it. Oh, that's weird, but also maybe if it works, like if it works, then what? If it's not broken, why fix it? So I've always looked at it in a weird kind of way that, oh, I've always thought that Christianity, are like being able to like find Jesus, is always been it's always been a smooth transition. It's always been something that it just comes to you. It's not something that is forced, or something that is like being like, oh, here it is, like accept this. Yeah.
I'll contribute to that a little bit. I had a very similar perspective on evangelism in years back. I kind of viewed it, to give an analogy similar to what you were saying, I viewed evangelism as not unlike a Rubik's Cube. You know, you ever try to solve a Rubik's Cube? You ever succeed?
Yep.
You're a hell of a lot better than I am. I have never managed to figure that out. That might just be because I've got that torn up right hand and terrible manual dexterity there. Or it could just be because I am, for all the things I may be good at, terrible at that level of spatial reasoning. I don't know. But the way I've always understood it, you can solve a Rubik's Cube by, you know, figuring out, getting the dimensions right, lining up all the sides and solving it that way. Or you can do what I did the first time I was handed a Rubik's Cube, and carefully rip off all the stickers and put them on the right sides. And in the end, does it matter, because you've solved the Rubik's Cube either way? You have reached the solution. What does it matter? And, you know, the ends justify the means, so to speak. But then again, I pause a minute, like, wait a minute, I've heard that argument for a lot of things before. And I wrestled with that for a little bit, and then I came to Japan. And I encountered something that I hadn't seen before, which is an entire society where people will very often say one thing and do something entirely different. And so I got to talking with the proselytizers that I was well connected with, the people who really took that quota approach to saving souls. And they were, the ones I met in Japan, they were so flummoxed by their experiences in Japan. Because they'd be like, for my first like 6 weeks here, man, I was doing gold. Every person I talked to said they wanted to accept Jesus. Everybody I asked just gave me an unequivocal yes. I never got a no. But then they never came to church the next day. And then I could never find them again. And they couldn't figure it out. Like they stopped returning my calls and nothing. And then I started to realize, like, well, you got the answer, but you didn't communicate any of what was important. Like you went into it looking for a transactional response. And you got your transaction, but you got what you wanted and gave them nothing. And that is where I think that kind of evangelism falls flat. It's because it's all about, I need to save X souls for me, to assuage my guilt or to get me into heaven or do what I feel I'm supposed to do. It's a self-centered sort of outreach in a lot of cases. And in that way, it is uniquely American. God, if there's anything we Americans do good, it's exporting selfish ways of thinking.
I just, as you were talking about and used the word quotas, I had this image of like, conversion as a multi-level marketing scheme. Like, here's John. He's converted 250 new souls this week, and he gets a new car.
There's a quick star of Bethlehem. Yeah, you know. And you guys can disagree with me.
Gosh, I broke down.
So that was really funny. Like the MLM metaphor, it's always fun. Like when I got first converted as a Christian, it's like I've always thought of it like, oh yeah, it actually is kind of a multi-level marketing like approach. I mean, you share Jesus to somebody, and that someone's gonna share it to 2 other people, and that 2 other people is gonna share that to 2 other people, and all of those stuff. It becomes, oh yeah, because you need to follow up as well. being a multi-level marketer, you need to, like what Pastor Don said, you got the transaction, but for it to be successful, that transaction needs to be able to be fruitful as well. It just doesn't stop for them buying into the system. It becomes successful when those people who bought into the system is being consistent with having people buy into the system as well. And I found it really funny, and that's ingenious actually. Yeah.
I feel like this is probably a very damaging metaphor for us to be using, though. You should probably switch back to water.
Well, you're right. The multi-level marketing is a terrible analogy for what we want to do.
Right.
But it's not a bad analogy for what a lot of us do. And I think that is something to be aware of. It's a terrible analogy for what we want to do, but it's dead on for what a lot of us are actually doing. And we see this in a lot of things, but I think evangelism is one of those places where we see it the strongest. Is this, I said earlier, transactional mindset, this idea that our faith interaction is about do X and receive Y. And then that associates very easily with like prosperity gospel stuff of ask and you will receive, pray and you'll get what you want type stuff, which does not, no, I mean, none of this tracks with the Bible, obviously, but it also is, it has very little to do with nurturing a person, let alone a functional faith.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and I'm going to run back to my water analogy because I feel like it's a little bit healthier. It's taking people who maybe have had a little bit of water here and there in their lives, but drink a lot of soda, giving them a bottle of water and say, here, drink this. And maybe they drink it and maybe they don't. As opposed to convincing them, like, you know, this is water, this is better for you. Feel how much better you feel after you drink this compared to all of the soda and the other sugary, unhealthy, like instant hit of satisfaction. And then 5 minutes later, you're feeling thirsty still. Mm-hmm. Things that you have been drinking, that you have been allowing into your spirit.
Yeah. And this is something, I think you touch on something really important, that instant hit of satisfaction. And when we talk with things as deep as faith, man, it is easy to find those one or two things that give us that momentary hit of divine satisfaction, that, oh man, I feel the spirit type moments. Those are, and I say this not just as a pastor, but with the confidence of a pastor with a background in musical theater and stagecraft. They're really easy to manufacture those moments in a worship set. And I know that is the most cynically depressing thing to ever hear, but it's true. Like most of your mega church, your evangelical pastors, what they're using when they get these come to Jesus moments is they're using a combination of, a couple of verses that really resonate in their own isolated sense out of context, combined with some really wicked stage design and, the stage craft of timing out a worship service. They're building an emotion. And I am immediately, and again, I fully acknowledge that this is spiritually very cynical, but I am immediately suspicious when we hear about these faith experiences that are all built on these moments that I felt something. And there's nothing more to it than that. I mean, these moments of feeling definitely have a good starting point, but there are, I guess what I'm trying to put is we've run into a lot of faith environments that have become the spiritual equivalent of McDonald's. Yeah. They're selling us only those moments of apostasy, those moments of sudden faith explosion, but they're not selling us anything of substance beyond that. Did I beat the multi-level marketing analogy?
Yeah,
I think the words faith explosion.
Yeah, we're definitely killing it with the metaphors right now. I love it.
Faith explosion. I feel like that's a perfect product name.
Either that or a prog rock piece, one or the other.
Either way. But no, the metaphor fits. I mean, if this is drive-through McDonald's, and what I what I tend to find is that can be good and healthy and necessary in some cases. You need those moments to hook people a little bit, or to catch their attention. There needs to be a little bit of flash. That's why Jesus performed miracles. It was to get people's attention, right?
Yeah,
The water,
it's a big component of it, certainly.
Right. It's like, hey, I'm not kidding around when I say Son of God. Here, water into wine. Right.
Which, by the way, can we take a minute and acknowledge just how awesome it is that that's what Jesus' first miracle was? He didn't raise the dead. He didn't heal anybody. He went to a party, and when the party was getting run dry, he's like, nah, I got this.
Now, we continue. So, yeah. But that's the thing. I mean, we find our faith, the faith that lasts, not in those moments of quote unquote divine ecstasy or a faith explosion, but in those moments of silence where nothing is happening and you still feel God.
And that's, people have always found me weird for a lot of reasons, but in the faith itself, people often find me weird when they ask, what is your favorite worship service to prepare? And, you ask any pastor that question, they're going to be like, oh, man, it's all about Easter, or it's all about Christmas Eve, or, Christmas Day if we do that. You know what my favorite service is to prepare?
What is?
Good Friday. Half the churches I've encountered don't even do a Good Friday service anymore.
It's always Easter.
It's always Easter. But that is, to me, it's emblematic of how many of us have come to explore our faith, that we want to shortcut straight through to Easter, but we want to skip Golgotha in the process. But part of what we do, a lot of what we do in our lives lives either on Good Friday or Holy Saturday. So much of what we do and where we're at is either in that place of death or in that place of unknowing, of waiting, of expectation. Those Easter moments are so god-awfully rare. Those Advent moments, like, they never come. You don't get your Constantine moment of conquer by this in the sky. It's not a thing that happens to everybody, and it's even questionable whether it actually happened to Constantine or not. But if we look at moments like Good Friday, those are the moments where we get to come face to face with who God is and what God actually does. Not the big faith explosion stuff, not the McDonald's moments, but those day-to-day momentary interactions, those moments where we're in grief, where we're in suffering, where we're like, Amen. What in the hell am I going to do with this? And, we think to look for God in our moments of victory. I just talked about this in the Psalms from the Trails not too long ago. Once we get to our moment of victory, we're like, yes, no, I couldn't be magnanimous in victory. I can give to you in my great disposition all of the kindness that is due from someone who is a Christian. But when we're suffering, we're so quick to say, oh, screw you, buddy, I'm busy. But if we spend our moments in, y'all got me preaching here again, and I apologize.
No. Actually,
it's pretty easy.
That was nice. Yeah. Speaking of Psalms from the Trails, there's this one certain message that stuck to me ever since he said that. It's like when David was complaining to God, it's like, and then at the end of the psalm, he was like, almost every psalm is like that. He's gonna complain, and then at the end of it, he's gonna realize that, oh, my God is amazing. And there's this one sentence that he said, like out of one of those episodes, it says that there's gonna be points in our lives where it's gonna be low. There's gonna be sometimes that it's gonna be high. But the most wonderful thing is that there's always gonna be that constant. God is always gonna be in our constant, and that's something that really resonated with me, because my first teacher when I started going into Christianity, she told me that actually Sunday you shouldn't look at a Sunday service that grand, because what's important is the Mondays through Saturdays. You need to be building your relationship with God from Mondays through Saturdays, and then you celebrate with the body of believers at Sundays. You can't just be a Christian on Sundays. You need to be Christian 24/7, and that just Oh, boom, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of an exchange between a pastor I knew once and a congregant. This is back when I was an intern. And then the congregant came up to the pastor and he said, "Man, I'm so glad for the Sunday worship services, man. These are the bread and butter. These are the meat and potatoes of my week." And the pastor just kind of stopped for him. He just looked at him and he said, "No. The worship service is your dollop of ice cream. It's your little piece of candy. The meat and potatoes is you through the rest of the week. That's where the meat and potatoes of the faith is." This is the exact same sort of thing you were talking about. But in all of that, I'm also reminded, because I get reminded of things very easily. We talk about all this stuff, and we've got our ups and our downs, but what we often forget to acknowledge is the divinity as present in the downs specifically. And not just, when we think of ups and downs, there's this tendency we have to say, oh, the downs are those points where like, oh, Lord, I reach out to you because I know you're compassionate and I love you, God, but I'm just so sad. Those aren't the downs. Those are like the middles. The downs are the points where we're like, God, you and I have notes, all right? I have things that need to be said, and they need to be said loudly, at length, and using profanity from as many languages as I have available. It's what I call the Job moment. You guys read through the book of Job anytime recently? Now, I'm not gonna quote chapter and verse because despite being a pastor, I'm absurdly terrible at that. But there's one point in the book, and I forget exactly where Job is being pushed by his friends, and he says something along the lines of, I'm not going to say a word against God. My faith is so strong, I'm just not going to say anything bad about God. And when you look at that verse in isolation, you're like, yeah, that's the Job I know. What you don't look at is like the 3 chapters after where he does nothing but complain about God. Like that, the next words out of his mouth are like, you know what, dude? Let me tell you something. And those are those moments, those impressive times where God is still present. Like God doesn't run away in those moments. God doesn't say, you know what, you say screw me, buddy, screw you, buddy, I'm out. That's not how God works. And you look for something divine, that's it. To me. I'm preaching again. God, terrible. I'm worse at this at night than I am in the mornings. In the mornings, I can at least sip my coffee and let other people speak. But man, I'm getting off on it tonight. You guys say things.
Of course, problem being, you hit a pretty good point. I mean, if faith and where we find those moments of divinity is not on those highs, but in the lows and the even lower parts of the cup, it's, again, collecting water in the basins of life, right? And experiencing the fact that even when we are just flat out mad at God for whatever is going on in our lives and why could you let this happen? What am I supposed to do with this? God's just like, yep, let me know when you're done. I'll be here.
Yeah. Well, I know I've run into that a few times in my life. Have you guys run into that one? Trying very hard not to preach on my own here.
We've had quite a few of those moments over the years. Actually, one that happened shortly after I came to Japan. I'll try to skip the gruesome details, but basically rumors got spread, and in our tiny little foreigner community in Western Hyogo, I wound up being persona non grata. And so I didn't get invited to any of the foreigner gatherings or out to dinner or lunch with anybody for probably a good 6 months. And that isolation, especially back in the days when internet wasn't really that great out in the sticks and Skype wasn't necessarily so big of a thing, it kind of sucked. And then suddenly there's this random lady at the cash register saying, "Hey, are you a Christian?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, suppose I am at that." And suddenly everything starts to slowly climb back up the hill.
Yeah, those are the moments where God appears, man. Never those big moments. It's those little moments when you most need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I've had actually that moment. That was my turning point when I became a Christian, actually. So I'm half Japanese, but I grew up in the Philippines most of my life. Basically, my whole life I was in the Philippines. All of my plans have been like set for me. Like, when you're in college or you're in high school, oh, my peak is about to come right now, and I can see what I want. I mean, basically it's up for grabs for me. And then, oh, God was like, oh no, you're gonna go to Japan, because apparently yeah, because I had two passports back then, and then the Japanese government was like, nope, you're not allowed to have that, and then stuff. So my parents decided to bring me back here and then try some stuff out for a year. And then that year was very difficult for me. That's when I felt like borderline depressed. That's when I was like definitely broken, I would say, because I moved to Japan at that time. I was a fresh grad. I didn't know Japanese. I was severely obese. And so it was very tough for me adjusting, because first I didn't know the language, and then I didn't know anyone. And it was in the middle of the year, around September, where like basically all of my friends from university back in the Philippines, it's either they got their job. So, and then this is the height of Facebook, where everyone's just posting their victories online. So everyone's it's either they're getting jobs that they're dreaming of, that both of like most of us planned and applied at the same time, or they're getting into law school, which was my dream before. So it was very tough for me. And then I'm just staying at the couch at my parents' house, being like a freeloader and stuff. And it was yeah. And then I tried applying as much as I can here in Japan, but no one's accepting, because it's September. Everyone's like fully packed already. So it was on top of that, back in the Philippines, my uncle died, and it was just like on top of everything, and it was very hard. And then like that light at the end of the tunnel for you, Travis, with that old Filipino friend that we met randomly at the grocery store, that, oh, why don't you come to KUC, Kobe Union Church? And then it just started from there. And yeah, it started building back up. And yeah, the rest is history, is what they say.
Yeah, that's how it goes. I mean, and that's something that I think maybe you encounter more in people overseas. And hey, here we go, tie it back to the international, right? To people who don't necessarily grow up dyed in the wool, as it were, but for people who, I guess, come to or come back to Christ at a certain later stage in their lives, is that we all wind up broken at some point, and having the courage to accept God in those moments when you're broken, because that's when God can be standing there with that bottle of water saying, hey, I got this, come on, let's go.
Yeah, well put.
Right.
And I think there's a bigger conversation that's going to roll from here, which indicates to me that this is the perfect time to break for part two. So we'll roll this conversation over into our second part here. For now, I want to take a second. I want to thank anyone who's watched to the end of this video so far. And I want to tell you to stay tuned for part two, which is going to air next week, we'll still be featuring these same two gentlemen. And I know a week seems like a long time, but I promise for the three of us, it'll be like 15 seconds. So you don't have to worry about us. We'll be fine. In the meantime, if you haven't yet checked out any of our other videos, you can find them on our YouTube channel. You can find them here on the Facebook stream. And you can also check out our podcast channel, which carries the remote pastoral care, a lot of our sermon recordings, and other things as well that come out. All the information on these you can find at our website, which the link for that is in the description. Guys, you have anywhere people can find you online if you want to make that stuff public at all?
I am as anonymous as it is possible to be in this day and age, but if you want to talk to me, you can find me on the Discord.
Yeah, the Discord server is the place to go for us. It's where we're having most of these conversations anyway. I know it's a little retro with the whole text threads and stuff like that, but it's a good way to keep a conversation going. Link to that also on the website. Hey, website's great for like having links to stuff. I love it. In the meantime, for those of you who are still watching, thanks for sticking around. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.